8 o'clock in the evening. A 41-year-old woman takes over the helm of a 37-foot catamaran in the Straits of Florida. She is not wearing a life jacket. She is not wearing a harness. She has no personal locator beacon on her. Her husband goes below to sleep. Some hours later, he says he is woken by a loud noise. He comes up. The helm is unmanned. His wife is not on the boat. 45 minutes after that, 45, he transmits a distress call. Not from the catamaran, from a life raft, which he has already launched, boarded, and loaded with a selection of items he chose to take with him. 3 hours after that, the United States Coast Guard finds him. They find him alone. Isabella Hellmann has never been found. Not that night, not in the search that followed, not in the 9 years since. There is no body. There is no wreck to examine, because the catamaran went down. Her husband was charged with second-degree murder. That charge was dropped. He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and served 8 years. And the thing that makes this case worth 28 minutes of your time is not the question of what he did. It is the question of what a plea deal actually settles and what it permanently leaves open for a family that has to live with the gap. I should say at the top what this video is not going to do. It is not going to tell you Louis Bennett murdered his wife, because he was not convicted of murder, and no court has ever found that he did. It is not going to reconstruct what happened on that deck, because nobody alive has described it. What it is going to do is walk you through what he admitted in writing, what investigators found on the boat, what prosecutors alleged and never had to prove, and where the line between those three things sits, because in this case that line is the whole story. Isabella Hellmann was a real estate agent living in Delray Beach, Florida. She was 41 years old. Louis Bennett was a mining engineer, a dual British and Australian citizen, originally from Poole in Dorset on the south coast of England. They met, they married, and by the spring of 2017, they had been married for 3 months and had an infant daughter, Amelia. Bennett was a sailor, and not a casual one. The court record establishes that he held a coastal skipper certification from the Royal Yachting Association in the United Kingdom. That qualification matters enormously to what follows, so let me explain what it is, rather than let it sit there as a piece of jargon. The RYA is the British national body that trains and certifies recreational sailors. Its qualifications run in a ladder, and coastal skipper sits well up that ladder. It is the level at which you are certified competent to take charge of a yacht on passages away from the immediate coast, including at night. To hold it, you are examined on navigation, on passage planning, and specifically on emergency procedure. 2 elements of that syllabus are directly relevant here: man overboard recovery, the drill, the immediate actions, the search pattern, and night sailing safety, which covers exactly the question of what precautions you take when somebody is on deck alone in the dark. Louis Bennett had been trained in both. That is not an inference. It is in the agreed factual statement filed with the court and signed by him. In late April 2017, the couple set out from St. Martin aboard a 37-foot catamaran called Surf into Summer, intending to sail her to the United States. It was, in effect, a delayed honeymoon. Amelia stayed in Florida with family. They sailed St. Martin, then Puerto Rico, then Cuba. That itinerary is worth a moment, because it tells you these two were not out of their depth. St. Martin to Puerto Rico is a proper open water leg. Puerto Rico to Cuba is a longer one, running the length of the Greater Antilles. By the time they turned north for Florida, they had several weeks and well over 1,000 miles of Caribbean sailing behind them on that boat, in that season, as a crew of 2. Whatever else this case is, it is not the story of a couple who wandered into something they had never done before. They had done it, repeatedly, for a month, and it had gone fine. On the 14th of May, they left Cuba bound for Florida. It is not a long passage. It is an overnight hop across the straits. Busy water, shipping, a strong current, but not the open ocean, and not, by the standards of what these two had already sailed, a demanding leg. It was the last one. One more night, and they were home, and Amelia was at the other end of it. At around 8 o'clock that evening, Bennett handed the helm to his wife for the night watch and went below. He did not require her to wear a life jacket. He did not require a harness. He did not require a personal locator beacon. Again, that is not my characterization. That is the language of the agreed statement in the court file. Before this goes further, where it comes from. The spine of this video is the United States Department of Justice, Southern District of Florida, its public announcement of the conviction, and the agreed factual proffer filed with the court, which is the document Bennett and the prosecution both signed as an accepted statement of what happened. Investigative detail comes from the FBI's Miami field office and the Coast Guard Investigative Service. The surrounding reporting is BBC, Associated Press, and Miami Herald coverage filed at the time. I am leaning as hard as I can on the signed document, and the reason is simple. This case never went to trial. There was no jury, no cross-examination, no testing of the prosecution's theory. What exists instead is a set of facts the defendant himself agreed to in writing, and those are the strongest and fairest things to build on, because he accepted them. Where I describe something as a prosecution allegation, that is what it is, and it was never tested. I will keep saying so. Now, the night watch. If you do not sail, here is what one is. On a passage where the boat keeps moving through the night, somebody has to be awake and in charge while the others sleep. That person steers or monitors the autopilot, watches for shipping, watches the weather, and handles anything that comes up. Watches are usually a few hours. You hand over, you brief the person taking over, and you go to bed. It is completely normal. It happens on every offshore boat every night at sea. What is also normal, and what is drilled into anyone with formal training, is what you do about the person alone on deck in the dark. Because a night watch has one catastrophic failure mode. If the person on deck goes over the side while everyone else is asleep, nobody knows. There is no shout, no splash anyone hears, no witness. The boat sails on. By the time the next watch comes up, the person in the water is miles astern, in the dark, in a piece of ocean that no longer has any defined position attached to them. This is why the equipment exists. A life jacket keeps you floating when you are exhausted and cannot tread water anymore. A harness, clipped to a line running down the deck, is the one that actually prevents the situation. It physically stops you leaving the boat. And a personal locator beacon, worn on the person, is the difference between a search area of a few hundred meters and a search area of hundreds of square miles. Activate it and a satellite knows where you are. Nobody makes rules about this for daytime sailing with the crew awake. Everybody makes rules about it for one person alone on deck at night. Isabella Hellmann had none of the three. There is one more thing worth setting out before the night itself, and it is the water they were in. The Straits of Florida are not ordinary sea. Running through them is the Gulf Stream, one of the fastest major currents on the planet. A river of warm water several tens of miles wide, moving north at anything up to 3 or 4 knots. 3 knots does not sound like much. Consider what it does to a person in the water. It means that in 1 hour, they have moved 3 nautical miles from where they went in, regardless of anything they do, and regardless of anything the boat does. In the 45 minutes between Bennett saying he found the helm empty and the distress call going out, the current alone had carried the search area more than 2 miles. And that is only the drift you can calculate. The other problem is knowing where to start. If you do not know the moment somebody went over the side, you do not have a point at all. You have a line, the boat's entire track through the night, and somewhere along it, an unknown time ago, a person left it. Which is exactly why the training is what it is. In a man-overboard drill of the kind an RYA coastal skipper is examined on, the sequence is drilled to be automatic, and the first actions are the ones that matter most. You shout, so everybody aboard knows. You throw flotation immediately, not to reach the casualty, but to mark the water. You mark the position, which on any modern boat is a single button that stamps a latitude and longitude into the chart plotter at that instant. You put somebody on pointing, keeping eyes locked on the casualty and never looking away, because a head in a seaway disappears the moment you glance elsewhere. You turn the boat, and you go back. And if it is night, you fire a flare, because a parachute flare turns several hundred meters of black water into something you can actually search. The entire doctrine is built around one insight. The first 60 seconds decide it. After that, the ocean is winning. Bennett threw a life ring. Beyond that, by his own signed admission, he could not recall calling her name, fired no flare, and searched with neither the catamaran nor the dinghy. In the early hours of the 15th of May, Bennett says he was woken by a loud noise. He came up and found the helm unmanned and his wife gone. He has consistently said he did not see what happened, and nothing has ever established otherwise. What happened next is the part of this case that has never sat right with anybody who sails. He did not, in the agreed statement, use the equipment or the training he had. He threw a life ring over the side. He could not recall whether he had ever called out her name. He did not fire a flare, and flares are precisely the tool for this, because a parachute flare lights up a wide circle of black ocean for long enough to see a head in the water. He did not use the catamaran to search. He did not use the dinghy that was attached to it. He admitted, in that signed document, to making minimal effort to look for his wife. Instead, he prepared to abandon the boat. He launched the life raft. He got into it, and before he did, he went back and forth, loading items from the catamaran into the raft. I will come back to what those items were. He put out the distress call roughly 45 minutes after he says he discovered his wife missing. 45 minutes is a very long time. In a man overboard situation, it is the entire ballgame. The standard doctrine is that you transmit immediately, because the single most valuable thing you can give a rescue service is a position with a time attached to it. Every minute of delay expands the search area geometrically, because the person is drifting, and so is the estimate. He transmitted from the raft, not the boat. The Coast Guard reached him around 3 hours later. He was alone in the life raft. The catamaran was gone, or going, and in the raft with him were antique silver coins. The valuations reported at the time differ, around £30,000 in British coverage, around $100,000 in American coverage, and I am not going to pick one, because the number is not the point. The point is where they came from. Those coins had been taken from a yacht Bennett had worked aboard in St. Martin in 2016. He had previously reported them as having been stolen from his employer. That sequence deserves unpacking, because it is easy to skim past. The year before this passage, Bennett had been working aboard another vessel. Coins went missing from it. He was the person who reported them missing, the account given to the owner being that they had been stolen. And then, roughly a year later, in the middle of the night, in the Straits of Florida, with his wife missing and a boat going down under him, those same coins came off the catamaran and into the life raft with him. He was arrested over them and pleaded guilty, receiving a 7-month sentence. And here is where the timeline of the two cases braids together. He was already in custody serving that sentence for the coins when, in February 2018, he was charged in connection with his wife's death. He never came out. From the coin arrest onward, he remained in prison continuously. So the picture the Coast Guard was looking at that morning was this: a man alone in a life raft, his wife gone from a boat he was certified to command, with no life jacket, harness, or beacon on her. A distress call delayed 3/4 of an hour. Almost no search conducted. And in the raft, in the possessions he had chosen to carry off a sinking vessel in the middle of the night while his wife was missing, stolen property. A man who was, by his own later admission, barely looking for his wife, had found time to load the coins. The official search for Isabella Hellmann began once the Coast Guard had him aboard, and it was substantial, aircraft and surface units working the straits. But the search had been handed an almost impossible problem, and it was the one built in from the first minute. There was no marked position. There was no time of entry into the water. There was no beacon transmitting. There was a man who had been asleep, a noise he could not identify, and a stretch of the boat's track through the dark with a strong current running across it. They were not searching a circle. They were searching a smear, drifting north at 3 knots and widening every hour. Nothing was found. Isabella Hellmann has never been recovered. Then investigators got to the boat. The catamaran was located before she went down, and she was inspected. What that inspection found, according to the FBI, was that portholes below the waterline had been opened, and the damage to the twin hulls appeared to have been caused from the inside. I want to be careful and exact here. Those are the findings investigators reported, and the basis of what prosecutors put forward. They were never tested at trial, because there was no trial. Nobody has ever established in a courtroom who opened what. But understand what that finding describes, because it is not ambiguous as an engineering matter. A boat that hits something takes damage from the outside in. The impact is external. The material fails inward. The water follows. That is what a collision looks like, and any surveyor can read it. Damage originating on the inside is the opposite. It means the failure started in the interior of the hull and worked outward. And an open porthole below the waterline is not damage at all. It is an opening, deliberately unfastened, in a part of the boat that is designed never to be opened while she is in the water, because doing so floods her. The word investigators used was scuttled, intentionally scuttled. That is what turned a missing person case into a criminal one. Bennett was charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged a motive. They said he stood to inherit Hellmann's apartment in Florida and the contents of her bank account. They pointed to what they characterized as marital strife, and they noted that in the months after she vanished, Bennett asked for his wife to be declared dead. Every sentence in that paragraph is an allegation made by prosecutors. None of it was ever put to a jury. I am reporting that the claims were made because they were made publicly and they are part of the record of the case, not because they were proved. He was due to stand trial for second-degree murder in December 2018. The trial never happened. In November, prosecutors filed a new charge, involuntary manslaughter, killing without malice, and dropped the murder count. Bennett changed his plea to guilty. This is the part I actually want to spend time on, because it is the part that gets flattened everywhere else, and it is the reason the title of this video says manslaughter and not murder. Involuntary manslaughter is not a smaller version of murder. It is a different thing. Murder requires malice, an intent to kill, or an extreme indifference to whether someone dies. Involuntary manslaughter says a death was caused unlawfully, but without that intent. What Bennett actually admitted in the plea is specific and worth hearing in full. He admitted he did not witness what happened to his wife. He admitted that what happened was foreseeable. He admitted that it was caused by his negligence. And he admitted that once he discovered she was gone, he made minimal effort to find her. No name called that he could recall, no flare, no search with the catamaran, no search with the dinghy. That is a man accepting that his wife died because of things he did and failed to do, and that a competent skipper would have foreseen it. It is not a confession to killing her deliberately. It is not an account of what happened on that deck. And critically, the plea agreement means the scuttling allegation, the financial motive, the marital discord, none of it was ever tested. It was withdrawn from the arena. Why would prosecutors do that? The honest answer is the one that runs through every case in this series. There was no body. There were no witnesses. The boat was on the seabed. Proving murder beyond reasonable doubt with no victim, no witness, and no scene is extraordinarily difficult, and a plea to a lesser charge that guarantees a conviction is often the outcome that a prosecutor judges best available. Think about what a defense barrister does with the prosecution case at trial, and you can see the calculation. The scuttling finding is powerful, but the boat sank. Investigators inspected her before she went down. She was not raised, sectioned, and put in front of a jury with experts standing beside her. A defense would press hard on what could and could not be established from an inspection in those conditions, and on the fact that a catamaran that has struck something and is flooding is by definition a boat being damaged by the sea. A judge would be asked whether evidence of a theft the previous year tells a jury anything about what happened on that deck, or whether it simply makes the defendant look like a bad man. That argument is not frivolous, and it frequently succeeds. The absent search is the strongest material the prosecution had, but it points at negligence far more cleanly than it points at intent. A man who panics, freezes, and does the wrong things at 3 a.m. is a recognizable human being. It is not, on its own, evidence that he put her in the water. And the motive evidence, the apartment, the bank account, the marital strife, is the kind of thing that sounds overwhelming in a newspaper and thin in a courtroom, because a great many people stand to inherit from a spouse, and almost none of them kill anybody. Stack all that up in front of 12 jurors and ask them to be sure, beyond reasonable doubt, with no body, and you can see why the government took a guaranteed 8 years over a coin toss. It is also, for a family, the outcome that answers nothing. Because here is what the plea leaves standing. A woman is dead. Her husband has formally accepted responsibility for that death. He has not said how it happened, and the evidence suggesting the boat was deliberately sunk sits in the file, unresolved, permanently. In 2019, Louis Bennett was sentenced in Miami federal court by U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno. His defense asked for 7 years, arguing he should be reunited with his daughter sooner. The judge rejected it and imposed the maximum available for involuntary manslaughter, 96 months. 8 years, plus 3 years of supervised release afterwards, and restitution of $22,910 payable to his and Isabella's daughter. The judge's stated reasoning was that the circumstances of the case required the maximum the law allowed. That sentence is worth sitting with. The maximum. Not a mid-range sentence for a tragic accident at sea. The ceiling, for a man whose defense was that this was negligence. At the hearing, Bennett read out an apology to Hellmann's family. He said he knew they had been through unimaginable pain as a result of his actions, and that he was sorry. He said his words could not heal them, but he hoped their pain would ease. He described losing Isabella as the greatest loss he had endured, and said his only remaining desire was to raise their child. I am reporting that because it happened, and it is part of the record. Her family were in the room. What they made of it is theirs. Which brings this to Amelia, who was not yet 3 years old when her father was sentenced for causing her mother's death. By the time of the sentencing, Isabella Hellmann's family had not seen the child in 2 years. What they arranged afterwards was a visit, traveling to Scotland to see her at Bennett's parents' home. A lawyer for Hellmann's family put the hope plainly at the time that those visits would continue so that Amelia would grow up knowing there were 2 families who loved her and would support her. Think about the generosity in that sentence and about who it is coming from. Isabella Hellmann's relatives, whose sister and daughter vanished off a boat in the dark and was never recovered, whose case ended in a plea deal that closed the file without ever explaining the night, traveling to another country to sit with the parents of the man who caused it, so that a child would not lose half of her family as well as her mother. That is what is left. There is no grave. There was never a body to bury. There is no verdict describing what happened on the deck of Surf Into Summer in the early hours of the 15th of May, because the only living witness has never described it, and the plea meant nobody was ever required to. What there is a signed document in a federal court file in which a certified skipper accepted that he sent his wife on deck alone at night with no life jacket, no harness, and no beacon, that what happened to her was foreseeable, that it happened because of his negligence, and that when he found her gone, he did almost nothing to find her before he got into a life raft with a bag of stolen coins. Isabella Hellmann was 41. She sold houses in Delray Beach. She had been married for 3 months, and she had a baby daughter waiting for her in Florida, and she was 400 miles and 1 overnight passage from home.